In 1996, Evan Mercer and his 10-year-old twins vanished from their family farm outside the small town of Deer Hollow, Texas. Their truck was still in the driveway. The breakfast table was set for 3. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. Just silence. The kind that settles in the bones of a town and never quite leaves. Nearly 30 years later, the earth gave something back. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that don't rest easy. The drought had lasted through 3 summers, and by August of 2025, the land around Deer Hollow had turned brittle and colorless. The town's farmers said the ground had forgotten rain. Dust rose from the earth in thin, trembling sheets that clung to fence posts and cattle bones alike. Abigail Mercer rolled down her window as she slowed her rental car along Harvest Road, tasting grit in the air. It had been 29 years since she'd last driven this way. The farmhouse appeared over the rise like something half-remembered, its roof sunken at one corner, its porch leaning forward, as if eavesdropping on the wind. She parked beside the rusted gate, killed the engine, and sat in silence. The cicadas were loud. Beneath their drone, a more subtle sound persisted, the ticking of her car's cooling engine, the pulse in her throat. She had rehearsed this visit for months, ever since the county coroner's office had called about a potential development in her brother's case. Evan Mercer, gone at 36, along with Caleb and Mara, just 10 years old. The file had sat in police storage for decades, reduced to brittle paper and grainy photos. A missing persons report turned legend. But 2 weeks ago, a construction crew clearing a new irrigation line had unearthed a section of pipe containing fragments, bone, metal, fabric, and a child's tooth. DNA results were pending, but the sheriff hadn't waited for confirmation before calling her. Abigail stepped out of the car, dust crunching beneath her shoes. The fence was sagging, the barbed wire brittle enough to snap with her fingers. Beyond it, the cornfield stretched dry and lifeless, nothing left to harvest. She pushed through the gate and walked toward the house. The door hung crookedly on one hinge. Inside, the air smelled of rust and damp wood. She paused in the entryway where the linoleum had peeled away, revealing gray boards underneath. The kitchen looked smaller than she remembered. The round table still stood in the center, 3 chairs arranged as if for breakfast. She had been here the morning before they vanished. She'd come to borrow a casserole dish and had found Evan laughing with the twins, Mara teasing Caleb about spilling orange juice. That was October 5th, 1996. By the next morning, all 3 were gone. She crossed to the window over the sink and wiped a streak of dust from the glass. Outside, the fields shimmered with heat. A few miles west, she could just make out the orange flags marking the dig site where the discovery had been made. She didn't want to go there yet. Instead, she turned toward the hallway. The door to the twins' room was open. Inside, faded wallpaper still showed the outlines of stars and planets where posters had once hung. She stepped closer, her chest tightening. On the floor lay an overturned toy truck, its paint long stripped by time, one wheel missing. She crouched, picked it up, and brushed away the dust. The name Caleb was written underneath in marker, the letters clumsy and backward. A sound came from outside, the creak of tires over gravel. Abigail straightened, heart hammering, and moved to the window. A white county vehicle had pulled up beside her car. A man stepped out, tall and heavy-set, wearing a badge on his belt. He removed his hat as he saw her watching. Sheriff Hal Boyd. He looked older than she remembered. Gray hair, sunburned skin, the same careful gait. He gave her a small wave before walking toward the porch. "Abby," he said when she opened the door. "Didn't think you'd get here so soon." "Wasn't far," she said. "Lubbock flight landed early." He nodded, glancing past her into the house. "You holding up all right?" She hesitated. "I've been better." Boyd rubbed his jaw, the motion slow and deliberate. "They've been running tests on what we found." Should have confirmation soon. Abigail's voice was quiet. You think it's them? I think the odds are high. For a moment, neither spoke. The house seemed to listen with them. Wood creaking softly, a window rattling in the heat. I wanted to see the place again, Abigail said finally. Understandable. Was it here they dug? He shook his head. About a mile down Harvest Road, East Irrigation Trench. Used to belong to your brother's property before the county rezoned it. Construction crew hit metal in the soil. At first they thought it was part of an old pump, and it wasn't. No. He studied her face. You ready to come take a look? She looked past him toward the fields, where sunlight burned through haze. Yeah, she said at last. Let's go. The sheriff's truck rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up a plume of dust behind them. Abigail sat in silence, her hands clasped in her lap. The radio murmured static. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked suddenly. Every winter, Boyd said, managing a smile. Then spring comes, and I change my mind. She nodded faintly. Evan used to say that too. They drove in silence until the orange flags appeared ahead. Several vehicles were parked along the trench. County, forensic, coroner. A few figures in reflective vests moved carefully near the pit. The air smelled of dry clay and gasoline. Abigail stepped out, shielding her eyes from the glare. The trench was deep, maybe 8 feet, its sides sloping toward a shallow puddle of water at the bottom. She could see the edge of a rusted pipe half exposed, like a rib emerging from the soil. A technician approached, clipboard in hand. Sheriff. Ma'am. Boyd nodded toward Abigail. This is the sister. The technician hesitated, then gestured toward the trench. We've secured the site. Found what looks like fragments of a vehicle door buried deeper down. Possibly a pickup. We're working slow. Abigail crouched near the edge, careful not to disturb the soil. From here she could see a flash of color amid the rust. A patch of red paint, sun-faded but still visible. Her brother's truck had been red. Boyd watched her closely. You remember the license? Yeah, she said, voice distant. BRL Novecentos e 74. The technician flipped through his notes. That's a match to what we've uncovered. Abigail felt the world tilt slightly. The air seemed too thin. Boyd put a steady hand on her shoulder. We'll keep digging, he said quietly. But it looks like we finally found your brother's truck. She nodded, eyes fixed on the trench. In the silence that followed, a crow called from somewhere distant, a harsh, echoing sound that carried across the barren fields. That evening she sat in a motel room on the edge of town. The television played softly, news scrolling in muted text along the bottom of the screen. Remains discovered in Dreer Hollow linked to 1996 disappearance. Her phone buzzed with messages from producers, journalists, even a documentary crew that had once begged her for an interview. She ignored them all. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the plains. Abigail turned off the light and sat by the window. In the faint reflection of the glass, she saw her brother's face. Smiling, alive, the way he'd been that morning years ago when he'd waved from the porch and said, "We'll be back by sundown." The twins had been laughing in the truck's back seat, tossing a baseball between them. Mara had yelled something she couldn't remember now. Then the dust from the tires had swallowed them whole. Abigail closed her eyes. The sound of the wind grew louder, almost like whispers through the fields. Or maybe just her memory reshaping itself again, the way grief always did. Tomorrow she would meet with the forensic team. Tomorrow they would confirm the remains. Tomorrow she would have to face what really happened on Harvest Road. But tonight, she let the darkness settle around her like an old blanket. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, she felt the weight of truth beginning to rise from the soil. Morning bled into the flat horizon without color. A pale sun climbed over the ridges of Dreer Hollow, turning the dust in the air to soft gold. Abigail woke before her alarm. the echo of the wind still humming in her ears. The motel smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. She poured a styrofoam cup of coffee from the lobby urn and stepped outside. The air was cooler than yesterday. Somewhere a pump jack thudded rhythmically, the only steady sound for miles. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sheriff Boyd. "We're resuming dig 8 a.m. Need you at site." She typed back, "On my way." The road to the trench cut through farmland that looked more like desert. Rows of corn stubble stretched like broken teeth on either side. The county had placed orange cones along the shoulder, but there were no other cars. When she reached the site, men were already at work. A backhoe idled nearby, its arm resting like a sleeping animal. Yellow tape fluttered weakly in the wind. Boyd was talking with a forensic tech near the trench. When he saw her, he lifted a hand. "Morning, Abby." "Didn't sleep much, did you?" "Not since '96, she said. He gave a short nod, understanding the half-truth in that answer. He motioned her closer. "We cleared more of the soil around the cab, doors intact enough to open." Abigail peered into the trench. The red truck lay tilted at an angle, half submerged in clay. The metal was pitted and dull. One of the side mirrors still clung to the frame by a thread of rust. She recognized the shape instantly. The old Ford her brother had rebuilt himself one summer. A technician descended into the trench using a rope ladder. The hollow thud of his boots echoed. He crouched by the open door, brushing away debris with a gloved hand. "Anything inside?" Boyd called. The man hesitated. "Not sure yet. There's fabric caught under the seat, maybe clothing, and..." Something small under the floor mat. Abigail's pulse quickened. She crouched near the edge, gripping the rope for balance. The technician lifted something in his tweezers, a strip of blue cloth, faded almost white. "Mara's blanket," she whispered. "She never went anywhere without it." Boyd's jaw tightened. "We'll catalog everything, Abby. Don't jump ahead." She nodded, but her breath trembled. The morning heat was rising. Sweat beaded at her temples. She stepped back and pressed her palms to her knees, willing her heartbeat to slow. Boyd spoke quietly to the forensic team, then guided her toward his truck. "You should get out of the sun for a bit." "We'll keep you posted. I want to stay." "I know, but it's going to be a long day." He opened the passenger door. "Sit. Hydrate. You can take notes if you want. Reporter instincts, right?" Abigail managed a faint smile. "Guess those never die." She climbed in, retrieved her notebook from her bag, and began jotting details. Trench depth, red paint, blue cloth, possibly blanket. Her handwriting shook slightly. Outside the windshield, men moved like patient archaeologists, each gesture deliberate. Every shovel of dirt seemed to scrape away part of her denial. By mid-morning, the heat shimmered so hard the air looked liquid. A call came from the trench. Someone had found bone fragments near the rear wheel well. Work stopped. Cameras and evidence bags appeared. Boyd stood, hands on his hips, staring into the pit as if it might stare back. Abigail stepped out of the truck. "Is it human?" "Too early," he said, but his tone betrayed him. A few minutes later, a forensic specialist approached carrying a small sealed container. "Femur fragment. Juvenile." The world tilted again. The sound of cicadas swelled until it drowned everything else. Abigail turned away, pressing her fist against her mouth. Boyd moved to her side, his voice low. "We'll get answers." "You have my word." She nodded, though the words barely reached her. When she opened her eyes again, the sky had deepened to the color of old bone, and a line of vultures circled high above the field. By noon, the sheriff called a halt so the forensics team could log everything before the afternoon light shifted. The workers set up a canopy at the edge of the trench, its fabric snapping in the wind. Abigail sat on the tailgate of Boyd's truck, her notebook balanced on her knees, watching the slow choreography of evidence bags being sealed and numbered. When she finally looked up, a county coroner's van had arrived. A man in a pale shirt stepped out, wiping sweat from his neck with a handkerchief. He introduced himself as Dr. Lane, the state pathologist. His voice carried a practiced calm that only made her stomach tighten further. "We'll take the recovered material to Lubbock for analysis," he said. "Preliminary visual match suggests a female child, approximately 9 to 11. Abigail's pen slipped from her fingers and rolled into the dirt. Boyd bent to pick it up for her but didn't speak. The doctor continued, "There's more embedded in the clay near the rear axle. We'll extract carefully. You don't want the press seeing this before we're ready." Abigail blinked. "The press already knows. They're calling this the Mercer Field." Boyd muttered something under his breath, then turned to her. "You told them?" "I didn't have to," she said. "Someone always tells them." The sheriff looked out across the horizon where heat shimmered above the fields. "We'll have to move quick before this turns into another circus." Abigail followed his gaze. In the distance, the highway bent like a strip of tin, and she could already imagine the vans that would soon roll over it. Logos painted on their sides, microphones ready, anchors rehearsing sympathy. "Hal," she said quietly, "what if we find all of them?" He took a long breath. "Then we start asking who put them there." Later, as the sight cleared, Abigail walked alone down the edge of the trench. The air had cooled slightly, the sky bruising toward evening. She crouched beside one of the orange flags marking the outer boundary. The dirt there was cracked and dry, but at its center a small patch of darker soil hinted at moisture far below. She traced the outline of the flag's shadow with her finger. Each flag represented a cataloged find: metal, bone, fabric, or trace material. There were 17 so far. 17 silent witnesses. When she straightened, she saw an elderly man standing by the fence line, watching. He wore a straw hat and denim shirt bleached nearly white. His posture was cautious, almost reverent. She approached. "Sir, you live nearby?" He nodded slowly. "Name's Dorsey. Got the farm just past that ridge. Did you know my brother?" "Everyone knew Evan. Hard worker. Used to help fix my tractor back when I could still drive." Dorsey's gaze drifted toward the trench. "Never did sit right with me, the way they just vanished. Folks said he ran off. I never believed it." "Why not?" He scratched his chin. "Because the man left his tools behind. A Mercer doesn't walk away from good steel." Something about the simplicity of that truth undid her a little. She swallowed hard. "Did you ever see anything that fall? Anything strange?" Dorsey hesitated. "Heard an engine one night, late, maybe 2 nights before they were gone. Thought it was his truck at first, but the sound was heavier. Diesel, maybe. Figured it was some rig on the highway." He adjusted his hat. "Now I ain't so sure." Abigail nodded. "You didn't tell the police?" "Didn't think it mattered. Guess I was wrong. The wind tugged at the tape behind them, the plastic snapping like small gunshots." Dorsey tipped his hat and turned back toward his truck. "You find them, Miss Mercer. The land's been waiting long enough." That night, the town slept uneasily. The single diner closed early. Lights went out along Main Street before 10. In the motel, Abigail recorded her thoughts into a handheld mic. Habit from years of freelance reporting. October 7th, 2025. The Harvest Road site has yielded 1 confirmed child bone, possible vehicle remains matching my brother's 1996 Ford. Locals restless. Sheriff steady but tired. I can't shake the feeling we're about to unearth more than we bargained for. She stopped the recording, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. Outside, thunder muttered far off but never broke into rain. She stared at the ceiling until the pattern of cracks began to resemble a map. Roads branching from a single point, leading everywhere and nowhere. In her mind, she replayed that last day in '96. Evan waving from the porch, Caleb chasing Mara through rows of sunflowers taller than both of them, the laughter that carried clear across the field. She had turned her car toward the city, thinking she'd visit again next weekend. There had been no next weekend. When she finally drifted to sleep, She dreamed of orange flags fluttering in endless rows, each one whispering a name she could almost recognize. The next morning broke with the brittle light of early autumn, thin, pale, and reluctant. Abigail stood outside her motel room watching a flock of blackbirds sweep across the sky in tight, trembling formations. The coffee in her cup had already gone cold, but she drank it anyway. The excavation site had been sealed overnight with floodlights and security tape. By now, the county had issued its official statement: ongoing investigation. Possible vehicle related to the 1996 Mercer disappearance. Those words, possible and related, felt like a knife dull enough to hurt in slow motion. Her phone buzzed. It was a local number she didn't recognize. "Miss Mercer?" The voice was raspy, male, older. "Name's Emery Pike. I used to work your family's land after your brother bought it off old Miss Klein. I think you'll want to hear what I got to say." She hesitated. "How did you get my number?" "Called Boyd's office. He told me you were in town. Said you'd listen." "Where are you, Mr. Pike?" "Dreer Hollow," he said. "Cabin off the service road near mile marker 9. Come before noon. Easier to talk when the sun's up. The line went dead before she could ask anything else." She glanced at her watch, 8:12 a.m., and grabbed her jacket. Dreer Hollow wasn't much of a place. A handful of rusted mailboxes leaned at crooked angles along a gravel road, their names half scraped off by time. The hollow itself lay in a dip between low ridges, dense with scrub oak and cedar. Fog still clung to the hollows like smoke. She followed the directions until the trees thinned and a cabin appeared, huddled in shadow. A dog barked once, low and uncertain. The man who stepped onto the porch looked to be in his late 70s, thin, stooped, with hands browned by decades of outdoor work. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, but his eyes were restless, darting to the tree line and back again. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "appreciate you coming. I heard you worked for my brother." He nodded. "Back when the place was still called Harvest Farm. Good man, your brother. Paid fair, always had time to talk." He motioned her toward a bench on the porch. "You were the city sister, right? The one who used to take pictures." "That's right." He studied her for a moment. "You still take any?" "Not since that year." The silence stretched between them, thick with shared ghosts. Finally, Pike leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I didn't talk to the police back then because nobody wanted to hear what sounded crazy. But I saw something the week before they vanished." Abigail's pulse quickened. "What did you see?" "A man," he said. "Came up the back road after dusk. I was checking irrigation pumps. He stopped his truck right by the Northfield gate, where that old scarecrow used to stand." "Do you remember what kind of truck?" "Black Chevy. Late model even for back then. He had floodlights on the roll bar, bright as daylight. When he stepped out, he carried one of them long farm shovels, not the short kind, and he just stood there." Watching the Mercer house through the trees, Abigail swallowed. "Did he speak to anyone?" Pike shook his head. "Never saw him again, but I found fresh tire tracks by the creek the next morning. Big ones, wide treads, not from local rigs." "Did you tell Sheriff Clark?" He gave a grim smile. "Clark was more interested in blaming your brother than finding him." Abigail stared out toward the hollow. The air smelled of wet cedar and rust. "Could you describe that man?" Pike hesitated, then said, "Tall. Shoulders like a fence post. Wore a coat even though it was warm that night. Had a scar under his right eye. Looked like something you'd get from barbed wire. Or a fight. Would you recognize him again?" The old man looked away. "I did. Once. 2 years later, down in Lubbock. Passed him at a gas station off Route 84. He was filling up a white van then, with Kansas plates. When he saw me looking, he smiled, like he knew I remembered." Abigail felt the hair rise on her arms. "Did you report it?" "No use," he said. Didn't even have a plate number, and by the time I thought to tell anyone, he was gone. A sharp crack sounded from somewhere in the woods, like a branch snapping under weight. Pike froze, eyes narrowing. He stood slowly, moving toward the porch railing. "Dear, maybe," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Pike?" He waved her back. "It's fine, but you should head on soon. Some things around here don't like being remembered." Abigail rose reluctantly. "If you think of anything else." He nodded, still scanning the trees. "You'll know where to find me." As she walked back to her car, she glanced once over her shoulder. The old man was gone from the porch. The fog was thicker now, curling between the pines like smoke from something still burning. On her way back toward town, Abigail pulled over near the old Mercer farmhouse. It stood abandoned, half swallowed by weeds. The windows were boarded, the porch collapsed on one side, yet the place still held the geometry of a home, the outline of rooms, the memory of laughter folded into the wood. She stepped out, crunching through dry grass. A no trespassing sign swung loosely from one nail, creaking. She ignored it. Inside, dust motes floated like ash in the angled sunlight. She moved room to room, kitchen, living room, hallway. In the twins' old bedroom, faded wallpaper still showed cartoon moons and stars. A child's handprint in paint decorated the door frame. Mara, age 6. Abigail touched it gently. Then she noticed something in the corner, a mark carved into the baseboard. Not letters exactly, more like a crude symbol. A circle intersected by a vertical line, the kind of thing you'd scratch in wood with a pocket knife. She traced it with her fingertip. When she stepped back, she realized it wasn't the only one. The same symbol appeared faintly on the inside of the window frame and again near the door. 3 marks, forming a rough triangle. A chill threaded through her spine. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Sheriff Boyd. "Found more under cab floor, human teeth. 1 adult, 1 child, call me." Abigail stared at the words until they blurred. Then she looked once more at the carved symbols, the sunlight spilling across them like silent warning signs. The wind rose, rattling the boards until the whole house seemed to breathe. Abigail reached the field before the sun began its descent. Sheriff Boyd was standing near the trench again, his hat pulled low, face streaked with dust. The forensics tents had multiplied. 2 new canopies, a generator humming softly, the smell of gasoline in the air. He didn't speak until she stepped beside him. "Under the cabin floorboards," he said. "Ground-penetrating radar picked up voids. We thought it was rodent tunnels. Turned out to be cavities, buried deep. How many? So far, 2 sets of remains. An adult male, a child. Partial." He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "1 tooth has a filling that matches your brother's dental record. We'll need lab confirmation, but..." He let the sentence trail off. Abigail stared at the sheet-covered gurney being loaded into the van. 16 years under our feet," she whispered. Boyd nodded. And someone wanted it that way. That evening she sat with him in the station's break room. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air thick with burnt coffee. The bulletin board behind them was plastered with aerial photos of the Mercer property and evidence tags. "We also found something else," Boyd said, sliding a clear bag across the table. Inside lay a small brass key, its handle shaped like a crescent moon. "Found wedged in a floor beam near the teeth." Abigail turned it over carefully. On the shaft, scratched almost invisibly, was the same symbol she'd seen in the farmhouse, the circle crossed by a line. "Looks like a brand mark," she murmured. "Could be. Could also be somebody's idea of a signature." She looked up. "Any chance this ties to that man Pike described?" Boyd leaned back. "Maybe. I remember rumors about a drifter that summer. Worked odd jobs. Claimed to be buying land for an out-of-state company. Never filed paperwork. Folks called him the man from Dreer Hollow because that's where he holed up. Then he vanished right after your brother. Pike said he saw him again, years later in Lubbock. Boyd grunted. Wouldn't surprise me. That kind of evil doesn't stay put. It migrates. Abigail studied the key. What if this isn't just one man? What if it's a pattern? Like these marks are identifiers. The sheriff rubbed his temples. We'll run the symbol through every database I can access. You, meanwhile, stay out of that farmhouse. It's a crime scene now. She gave a humorless smile. You know, I can't promise that. Didn't figure you would, he said. Night folded over Harvest Road. From her motel window, Abigail watched the red strobes of patrol cars flicker faintly across the horizon. The town below seemed suspended between two worlds, the one it remembered and the one unearthed today. She turned on her recorder again. October 8th. They found Dad, or what's left of him. A child, too. Maybe Mara, maybe Caleb. I keep seeing that symbol carved into the wood, like someone staking ownership over our grief. She paused, listening to the tape hiss. There's a name people keep saying in whispers. Somebody who used to camp near Dreer Hollow before the disappearance. They call him the preacher, though no one went to his church. I need to find out who he really was. She clicked the recorder off and sat in silence, heart thrumming. Outside, a freight train moaned somewhere far away, the sound long and mournful as memory. In the small hours, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. A man's voice, quiet, deliberate. You shouldn't have gone back to that house, Miss Mercer. Her throat tightened. Who is this? Long pause, then, almost kindly. The dead don't rest when you stir the ground. Leave it be. The line went dead. Abigail stared at her reflection in the dark window, the faint glow of the phone lighting her face. For a second, she thought she saw movement behind her in the glass, a shape crossing the parking lot shadows. But when she turned, there was nothing. Only wind, rattling the motel's loose sign until it squealed like a warning. She locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat with her back against the wall until dawn bled gray over the horizon. By sunrise, a gray wind was dragging dust clouds across the flat country. The sheriff's cruisers had left deep tire scars through the fields, and the yellow tape whipped against the wire fence like a restless flag. Abigail parked at the edge of the property and stared toward the farmhouse that had once smelled of coffee and sweet corn. She wasn't supposed to be there. Boyd had sealed the house after last night's call, posting a deputy to keep reporters out. But the deputy had gone to breakfast. His patrol car sat empty by the gate. Inside, the air was colder than she remembered, carrying the smell of mold and dry hay. Her flashlight beam swept the hallway, catching the faint glint of nails where family photos once hung. She moved toward the twins' room, the beam trembling slightly in her hand. The carved circle and line symbols she'd seen yesterday seemed clearer now, as if the night had sharpened them. She traced the one near the window again. A small piece of metal gleamed in the crack below it. A tack, or maybe something older. She worked it free. It was a button, brass, flattened with age, engraved with the same mark. Abigail slipped it into a plastic sample bag she'd taken from her press kit. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned quickly, light catching on dust motes, but the hallway was empty. Somewhere outside, a crow gave a short, angry cry. She exhaled slowly, forcing her heartbeat to settle. You're alone, she told herself. Then her phone vibrated. A text from Boyd. Need you at the station. Now. Someone just confessed the sheriff's office was a repurposed grain co-op building on the edge of town, its concrete walls painted a weary beige. When Abigail entered, Boyd was standing outside the interview room with a styrofoam cup in hand. Who is it? She asked. Name's Chester Lyle. Truck mechanic out of Canyon. Claims he used to know your brother. Says he's been carrying guilt for years. About what? He says he introduced Evan to a man who called himself Reverend Cole. Boyd's eyes were red from lack of sleep. That name ring a bell? Abigail shook her head. Boyd opened the observation window. Inside, a man in his late 50s sat hunched at the table, fingering a silver cross that hung from a leather cord. His face was leathery, sunburnt, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He walked in this morning asking for me, Boyd said. Said the Reverend had been collecting families. That Harvest Road wasn't the only place Abigail's mouth went dry. Collecting? His word, not mine. Claims the Reverend believed in returning purity to the soil. Some kind of backwoods theology. Boyd looked at her. You ready to hear this, Abby? She nodded. Inside the room, Lyle's voice was hoarse but steady. I didn't kill nobody, Sheriff. I swear it, but I brought him there. Why? Boyd asked. He paid cash. Said he was starting a church retreat. Needed to rent a field to hold sunrise sermons. He talked real soft, like a preacher on the radio. Quoted scripture but twisted it, always talking about the harvest of souls. Abigail sat across from him, notebook open but untouched. When did you last see him? Couple nights before your brother disappeared. He had a truck, black Chevy with big tires, floodlights. I remember 'cause they blinded me when he pulled up. She exchanged a glance with Boyd. Pike's description. Lyle rubbed the back of his neck. Next morning he came by my garage with mud all over the tires. Said the Lord's work was done. I didn't ask questions. His hands trembled. But then when I heard about the family gone missing, I started to think maybe that preacher wasn't no preacher at all. What happened to him after that? Boyd asked. Gone. Vanished. I heard talk he moved north. Changed his name to Claiborne, maybe Craw. Always something with clay. Abigail leaned forward. Would you recognize him? Lyle nodded slowly. Scar under his right eye. Like someone cut him with wire, the same detail Pike had given. Boyd turned off the recorder. That's enough for now. When they stepped into the hallway, Abigail could feel her pulse hammering. So Pike wasn't imagining things. No, Boyd said. And if what Lyle says is true, we're dealing with a pattern that crosses counties. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of slate. Abigail stood by her car, staring down the road toward Harvest Field. The wind smelled of rain. Somewhere out there, an old preacher's voice still seemed to echo through the dust. The harvest of souls. She opened her notebook and wrote only one line. Who was Reverend Cole? And how many fields has he sown? The rain began just after dusk. A hard, slanting storm that turned the roads into channels of red mud. Abigail's wipers struggled to keep up as she drove north toward the county line. The sheriff's office had finished taking Lyle's statement, and Boyd promised to forward her copies of anything new. But waiting had never been her strength. She remembered a detail from Lyle's story. A retreat, he'd said. Sunrise sermons. A quick search through the newspaper archives on her laptop turned up a handful of ads from that year, small text boxes in the local classifieds. The New Harvest Fellowship. Sunrise gatherings by the grace of Reverend Clay. Drear Hollow Road. All are welcome. The last notice was dated 2 weeks before her brother vanished. Abigail stared at the screen until the words seemed to tilt. It wasn't just her family. The Reverend had planted himself here, in this soil, long before them. The rain had thinned to drizzle by the time she reached the hollow again. Fog rolled off the creek beds, thick as milk. She parked near the overgrown trail Pike had described and followed it with her flashlight, boots sinking into the wet ground. After 20 yards, she saw it. A wooden sign half buried in vines, letters nearly erased by time. The New Harvest Fellowship. Her light swept across the clearing beyond. A circle of stones marked what might have once been a fire pit. Nearby stood the remains of a small wooden stage, collapsed to one side. The smell of damp wood and something faintly metallic hung in the air. At the center of the clearing, nailed to a tree, was a rusted metal plaque. The symbol was carved into it, a circle with a vertical line. She moved closer. The metal was pitted and flaking, but under the corrosion she could still make out faint words etched in a hand that was almost calligraphic. "The seed returns to the soil." Abigail's hand trembled as she took a photo. Then she noticed another shape behind the tree, a mound of disturbed earth, maybe 4 feet across, the soil darker than the rest. Her breath caught. She crouched, brushed aside the wet leaves. The surface beneath was soft. She pressed lightly with her palm, felt the give of air pockets below. A low rustle broke the silence. She swung her light around, beam slicing through mist. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, motionless, barely visible through the trees. "Mr. Pike," she called. The figure didn't answer. Then it turned and disappeared into the fog. Abigail ran after it, branches clawing her sleeves, heart pounding. But the forest swallowed sound. The only thing she could hear was her own breathing. When she reached the road again, her car was exactly where she'd left it. But the driver's door was slightly open. Her flashlight caught a smear of mud across the window, and beneath it, the same symbol drawn by a fingertip. She stood there for a long time, the rain tapping the hood of the car like fingers. Back at the motel, she locked the door and set her recorder on the table. October 9th. Found the remains of the new harvest site. Same emblem, same words. "The seed returns to the soil." Someone was there tonight, watching. This isn't just about my family anymore. It's about a man who believed burying people was a kind of worship. She shut the recorder off and sat in the dark. Every creak of the building magnified. Somewhere outside, a diesel engine rumbled past, slow, deliberate. The same sound Pike had described years ago. She rose and peered through the curtain. Headlights glided along the highway, bright white, high-mounted. A heavy truck. As it passed, its floodlights flared across her window, bleaching everything white for a heartbeat. When the glare faded, she saw what had been left behind on the glass. A small, wet handprint, the size of a child's. Abigail stumbled back, a cry caught in her throat. The handprint slid slowly down the glass, leaving a faint trail in the condensation, until it disappeared. She whispered into the darkness, "Mara." But there was only the sound of rain, and far off, thunder rolling across the plains like a closing door. By morning, the rain had cleared, leaving a film of mist on the roads. Abigail's reflection wavered in the diner window as she sipped coffee gone lukewarm. On the television above the counter, a local anchor was reporting the discovery of human remains, believed to be linked to the long unsolved Mercer disappearance. Her own face flashed briefly on the screen from an old interview she barely remembered giving. The waitress refilled her cup. "You that Mercer girl?" Abigail nodded. "Whole town's talking," the woman said softly. "Hope you find what you need." Abigail murmured thanks, left a few bills on the counter, and stepped out into the damp morning. The sun was climbing, weak and thin, and the air smelled of wet metal. She checked her phone. A message from Sheriff Boyd. "Pathology confirms IDS Evan Mercer and Mara Mercer. Caleb still unaccounted for." The words felt heavier than grief. They were confirmation, not comfort. She leaned against her car, breathing through the shock. Her brother and niece were in the ground, but one twin was missing, and someone out there wanted her to stop digging. The drive to Lubbock took 2 hours across empty farmland and endless sky. Wind turbines turned slowly in the distance, their blades slicing the air with patient rhythm. She had arranged to meet Dr. Lane at the forensic lab, hoping to see what the soil had preserved. Inside, the facility smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. Lane met her at the door, expression grave. "You shouldn't be here," he said, "but I knew you'd come." He led her to a sterile room where trays were laid out under harsh white light. 2 name tags, E. Mercer and M. Mercer. She forced herself to look. Her brother's remains were partial. Rib fragments, a section of femur. The dental bridge Lane had matched. Mara's were smaller, delicate as bird bones. Cause of death? She asked. Lane hesitated. Both show blunt force trauma. But there's something else. He lifted a photo from the table. Look here, etched into the frontal bone, not post-mortem damage. It was carved, Abigail's stomach clenched. The image showed the same circle and line symbol, faint but unmistakable. The preacher's mark, she whispered. Lane nodded. We've never seen anything like it in this county. Whoever did this treated it like a ritual. She turned away, fighting nausea. You said blunt force. What kind? Likely a shovel head. Flat, heavy, consistent with excavation tools. The words echoed inside her skull until they no longer sounded like language, just dull thuds. Was Caleb there? She asked finally. Not that we found. But there were 2 smaller footprints near the burial layer. Child-sized. One leading away. Abigail's breath caught. You think he survived? Lane's eyes softened. It's possible. But if he did, he was taken. Outside, the afternoon light had turned harsh and unforgiving. Abigail sat in her car, staring at her brother's photo on the dashboard. 1 twin alive, 1 buried. She opened her notebook and wrote, If Mara was the seed, Caleb was what the soil refused to keep. She closed the book, started the engine, and called Boyd. He answered on the 2nd ring. I just got Lane's report. There's something else, she said. He found markings carved into the bone. Same symbol. Boyd swore under his breath. That preacher's got his fingerprints all over this. Then we find him. You still have those old leads from '96. I pulled what's left. Clay used a P.O. box in Lubbock, under New Harvest Ministries. Address goes nowhere now, but I'll fax you the file. I'll be in town another day. I'll start there. Abby, Boyd said, voice low. Whoever left that handprint on your window, if you see them again, you call me first. I will, she said, though they both knew she wouldn't. She drove to the industrial side of Lubbock, where warehouses slouched against each other and the air smelled of oil and sun-baked asphalt. The address from Boyd's file led her to a derelict strip of offices. The sign above the door read, Harvest Storage, LLC. Inside, the hallway buzzed with flickering fluorescent lights. Most units were empty, but one door near the end had a tarnished brass plate. Suite 14, Clay Industries. Her pulse quickened. The lock had been replaced recently. She tried the handle anyway. It turned. The room smelled faintly of earth. Dust coated every surface except the center of the floor, where a rectangular patch was clean, as if something heavy had been removed. A wooden crate leaned against the wall, half open. Inside were pamphlets stamped with the same emblem, the circle and line. The text read, The harvest is near. Prepare the ground. At the bottom of the crate lay a Polaroid photograph, Evan's red truck, half buried in mud. Someone had written on the back in block letters, seed taken, soil closed. Abigail's hand shook. She slipped the photo into her pocket and turned toward the door, only to hear footsteps in the corridor. She froze, listening. A man's voice, faint but distinct. You shouldn't have come here. Her light flicked off instinctively. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Then, softly, the doorknob began to turn. The knob turned halfway, stopped. A breath of air slid under the door, carrying the faint smell of damp soil. Abigail held still, counting heartbeats. Somewhere down the hall, a compressor started up with a metallic groan, and the handle relaxed. She waited another 30 seconds before stepping backward toward the crate. The light of her phone caught something glinting in the dust. A small metal disc no bigger than a coin. She picked it up. A button, identical to the one she'd found in the farmhouse. Her pulse thudded. Whoever had been outside had been here before. Footsteps receded. A door slammed far away. She slipped from the room, moving quickly down the hall. The exit light burned a dull red. When she reached the parking lot, it was empty except for her car and a white van idling near the far curb. The driver's window was down, but the cabin beyond was shadowed. Abigail started the engine and pulled out. In her mirror, the van followed, keeping 2 lengths back. She took a random turn onto a frontage road, then another through a half-collapsed industrial park. The van stayed behind her until she cut her headlights and coasted behind a row of shipping containers. She waited, breath shallow. The van rolled past slowly and disappeared toward the highway. She exhaled and dialed Boyd. "Someone was inside that office," she said. "They followed me. Get back to Dreer Hollow. I'll have a unit meet you halfway," but halfway never felt safe. She kept driving until the landscape opened into the dark, flat sprawl of the plains. The horizon blinked with faraway lightning, and for a moment the fields looked silver, almost beautiful. On the passenger seat, the Polaroid seemed to pulse in the flashes of light. Seed taken, soil closed. She thought of the missing twin. Caleb, 10 years old then, maybe 30 now if he'd lived. What kind of man grows in the shadow of that message? A sign flashed by. Dreer Hollow, 12 miles. She pressed the accelerator. Hours later, Boyd's truck waited by the farmhouse gate, headlights off. He climbed out as she stopped. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "Lubbock PD found that storage office burned an hour after you left. Whoever you saw doubled back." Abigail stared at him. "They torched it?" "Every scrap. But they missed something." He reached into his coat and handed her a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a charred fragment of paper bearing the preacher's emblem, and below it, a handwritten date. October 10th, 2025. "Tomorrow," Boyd said. The wind rose across the fields, carrying the smell of smoke even this far out. Abigail looked toward the darkness beyond the corn stubble where the excavation lights glimmered faintly. "Whatever's coming," she said, "it's going to happen here." Boyd nodded once. "Then we'll be ready." The next day broke sharp and bright, the kind of morning that seemed to mock the storm that had scoured the plains the night before. From the ridge above the Mercer property, Abigail could see the irrigation ditch where the first bodies had been found. The field looked newly skinned, furrows of pale earth glinting like bone. Sheriff Boyd stood by his truck, hat in hand. "State investigators want to shut the site down till forensics clears," he said. "They're worried about contamination." "Contamination," she repeated, tasting the word. "What they're going to lose is time." He studied her a moment. "You've been running on fumes, Abby. Go back to town. Rest." She shook her head. "That date on the burned paper, October 10th, that's today. If the Reverend planned something, it's not in the past tense." Boyd looked toward the horizon where the heat already shimmered. "What do you think's going to happen?" "I don't know," she said. "But the message on that Polaroid, seed taken, soil closed. It sounds like he was waiting for a second harvest." Boyd rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You realize how that sounds?" "Yes," she said. "And I'm still right." They spent the morning combing through the farmhouse again, photographing every surface, every carving. In the kitchen, Abigail noticed something she'd missed before. A row of faint chalk marks on the inside of the pantry door, like someone tracking height. 3 sets of initials beside them, E.C.M. And then, far below the last line, a fresh mark drawn in dark graphite. C again, but smaller, shakier, as if written by an unsteady hand. She called Boyd over. "That wasn't here 2 days ago." He stared. "Who'd have reason to come back?" Abigail touched the mark lightly. "Someone who remembers." By dusk, clouds were piling again on the western horizon. The excavation floodlights came on, throwing long cones of white across the field. The forensic team had gone for the day, leaving only one deputy to guard the site. Abigail and Boyd stood by the trench, the smell of damp clay rising from below. "You ever think about leaving Texas?" she asked quietly. "Only when it rains," he said. Then he added, "When it doesn't, too." The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of an engine. Headlights flared briefly along the distant service road, then went dark. Boyd stiffened. "You see that?" "White van," she said. He reached into his truck, pulled out a flashlight and his sidearm. "Stay behind me." They walked toward the fence line. The air felt heavy, electric. Somewhere in the fields, a gate creaked open and closed again, slowly, like someone testing the hinges. "Deputy?" Boyd called. No answer. They followed the light from the flood lamps until they reached the far end of the trench. The deputy's flashlight lay on the ground, beam pointed into the soil. The man himself was gone. Abigail crouched, picking up the light. The beam caught a smear of mud shaped roughly like a shoe print, small, narrow, maybe a child's. Another print overlapped it, larger, boot-sized. Boyd's voice dropped. "He's here." A rustle came from the corn stubble behind them. Both turned. Nothing but shadows and the slow hiss of wind through dry stalks. Then, faintly, a sound rose. Someone humming. A tune, low and unhurried, old as a hymn. Abigail's skin went cold. "Do you hear that?" Boyd nodded, gun steady. "Yeah." They moved toward the sound, flashlights cutting across the field. The humming stopped. What replaced it was a child's voice. Soft, tremulous. "Help me." Abigail's throat tightened. "Caleb?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." She took a step forward, but Boyd caught her arm. "Could be a trap." She pulled free. "Could be my nephew." She pushed through the rows of dry corn, light swinging wildly ahead. A figure darted between stalks, small, barefoot, filthy. A boy, maybe 10. He looked over his shoulder once, eyes wide and empty with terror, then vanished into the dark. "Caleb!" she shouted. Boyd's flashlight swept the field, but the boy was gone. In the distance, the white van's engine roared to life. Abigail turned in time to see taillights bouncing across the ruts, heading for the service road. Boyd raised his weapon but lowered it again. The range too far, the risk too high. The wind carried the smell of exhaust and wet earth. Then silence. Abigail's voice was a whisper. "He's still alive." Boyd looked at her, face drawn tight. "Then that means the Reverend is too." Lightning flickered low in the clouds, casting brief silver over the field. The trenches gleamed like open wounds. The wind picked up, rattling the dry stalks so hard they sounded like bones clicking together. Abigail still stared at the space where the van's taillights had disappeared. A faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. "Boyd," she said, voice low. "He was right there." The sheriff holstered his gun, scanning the darkness. "And somebody wanted us to see him." "That's bait, Abby. Bait for what?" He didn't answer. From somewhere out in the corn came a single metallic clang, like a spade striking rock. Then silence again. They crossed the field cautiously, flashlights sweeping. The deputy's radio crackled weakly on the ground where he'd been stationed, broadcasting nothing but static. When Boyd bent to pick it up, the mud around it shimmered faintly in their light. Abigail knelt, touched it with her gloved fingers, then froze. The soil was damp but warm, like something had been freshly buried and was still releasing heat. Boyd saw her face. "What is it?" "Something's cooking under here," she said. "Help me dig." They used their hands, then a spare shovel from the truck. After half a foot, metal scraped metal. Abigail pushed aside the loose dirt. A rusted box emerged. Military surplus, marked with faded letters. Munitions, 1952. She looked at Boyd. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" He nodded grimly. Improvised grave marker. They pried it open. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay 3 objects: a child's shoe, a Bible with its cover burned away, and a Polaroid photograph. The picture showed a boy standing in the exact same field, holding what looked like a crow feather in one hand. Across the bottom, scrawled in black marker, "The harvest never ends." Abigail exhaled shakily. "He's playing with us." Before Boyd could reply, headlights appeared again on the ridge. 3 vehicles this time, creeping down the service road. The first bore the logo of the State Investigative Bureau, the others unmarked. Boyd lowered the shovel. "Guess the cavalry's finally here." Agents climbed out, rain slickers glinting. Their leader, a tall woman with clipped hair and the wary expression of someone who'd seen too many scenes like this, strode up to them. "Sheriff Boyd." "Agent Keller." "You're trespassing on a closed site." Boyd handed her the Polaroid. "Then you'll want to see this." She studied the picture, frowned, and motioned to her team. "Secure the perimeter. No one in or out without clearance." Then, turning to Abigail, "You're Mercer's niece." The reporter, "Former reporter," Abigail said. "Good. You'll understand protocol. Whatever you found, it's evidence now." Abigail opened her mouth to protest but stopped. Something in Keller's eyes, a flicker of unease, told her this wasn't standard procedure. "You've seen something like this before," Abigail said quietly. Keller's jaw tightened. "In 1997, near Amarillo. Different family, same message, same handwriting, and the victims. Never recovered. Wind gusted, bringing with it the first drops of rain." Keller turned toward the trench. "Let's move this inside before the storm breaks." They relocated to the farmhouse. The floodlights outside flickered as thunder rolled across the plains. Inside, the living room had been converted into a makeshift command post. Maps, evidence bags, a laptop running time-stamped photos. The Polaroid was sealed in plastic. The child's shoe lay beside it. Abigail stood by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "He's still out there, isn't he?" she said softly. Keller looked up from her notes. "The Reverend? Maybe. Or someone finishing his work." Boyd poured coffee from a thermos, hands trembling slightly. "We need to talk about that mark in the pantry," he said. "ECM, those are Ethan, Caleb, and Mara, right?" Abigail nodded. "Well, the new mark, the smaller C, wasn't there before. What if Caleb came back here himself? What if the boy we saw wasn't a ghost story?" Abigail turned from the window. "Then he's trying to tell us something." Lightning flashed, flooding the room with white. For an instant, every shadow jumped forward, alive. Then darkness swallowed it all again. Somewhere outside, an engine revved. Keller reached for her radio. "Units 2 and 3, report your status." Only static answered. Boyd swore softly. "We're losing power." "Generators in the barn," Keller said. "I'll send a man." "I'll go," Abigail interrupted. "I know the path." Keller hesitated. "You step out that door. You stay on comms." Abigail clipped the offered radio to her belt and stepped into the rain. It hammered the yard, turning dirt to slick clay. The barn loomed ahead, its roofline crooked against the lightning-lit sky. She could smell the rot of hay long gone to mildew. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rust and wet wood. She found the generator at the back, crouched beside it, and yanked the pull cord. Nothing. Again, nothing. Then, faintly, above the rain's hiss, she heard movement behind her, a slow shuffle on the planks. "Boyd," she called. No answer. She turned, flashlight trembling in her grip. A figure stood in the doorway, a man soaked to the bone, head bowed. His voice, when it came, was ragged. "You shouldn't have come back here, Abby." Her breath caught. "Uncle Ethan." He lifted his head, and the beam struck his face. Drawn, pale, eyes hollow but alive. "They said I was dead," he whispered, "but they only buried my name." The rain had steadied into a fine silver curtain by the time Abigail guided her uncle into the light of the barn's single-hanging bulb. It swayed in the draft, spilling light across his face. Ethan Mercer's features were thinner, his beard gone to white, but the shape of him, the sloped shoulders, the calm eyes, was unmistakable. Abigail's voice was a whisper. "You're alive." He nodded slowly. "Alive enough." Boyd's shout came from the doorway. "Abby, you in there?" She turned, flashlight jerking toward him. "He's here!" "Ethan's alive." The sheriff froze in the threshold, rain streaming off his hat brim. His eyes widened when he saw the man beside her. "Holy hell!" Ethan blinked at him, wary. "Who's that?" "Sheriff Boyd Hollis," Abigail said. "He's been handling your case, your disappearance." "Disappearance," Ethan murmured. "That's one way to say it." He coughed, a dry, tearing sound, then gestured to the barn wall. "We shouldn't talk here." They hear through the wood. Abigail exchanged a look with Boyd. "Who hears?" Ethan's gaze flicked toward the dark outside. "The same ones that came for us before. They don't like unfinished work." Boyd approached cautiously, palms out. "Mr. Mercer, no one's coming for you now." "You're safe." "Safe?" Ethan laughed, but the sound was hollow. "You think fences keep out ghosts?" Lightning flashed again, throwing their shadows huge against the boards. Abigail stepped closer, trying to study his eyes. They weren't wild, not exactly, just haunted, like he was balancing between two worlds and hadn't chosen which to stay in. "Where have you been all these years?" she asked gently. Ethan sank onto an overturned crate. "Hiding, waiting for the right season." He rubbed his hands together, staring at the dirt. "I tried to stop them once. That was my mistake." "Who?" Boyd pressed. "The men from the harvest. They called themselves caretakers." Abigail crouched. "You're talking about Reverend Cole." Ethan's face tightened at the name. Cole was the mouth. The others were the hands, the ones who did the work when the preaching was done. He looked up. "I buried them myself, thought it was finished. But you found the field again, didn't you?" Abigail nodded slowly. "We found the trench. And we saw someone tonight. A boy." Ethan's breath hitched. "Caleb." "You've seen him?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not since that night." He was supposed to run north through the cotton rows. "I told him not to look back." "Why?" Ethan's eyes glistened. "Because his sister didn't make it that far?" The silence stretched, broken only by the steady patter of rain on the tin roof. Boyd finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Mara's gone?" Ethan nodded. "They took her first." Abigail felt the barn tilt slightly around her. "Uncle Ethan, we need to get you to the farmhouse. Warm you up, get a doctor." He shook his head. "You can't bring me there." "That place isn't for the living anymore." Outside, thunder rumbled again. Boyd radioed the team at the house, but the channel was dead. Static hissed like whispering voices. He frowned, turned up the volume, then froze. Through the noise came a single word, faint but clear. "Harvest." Abigail's stomach knotted. "They're back at the house." Boyd's hand went to his sidearm. "Let's move." Ethan grabbed her wrist. "You can't fight them the way you think. You have to salt the ground." She stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Cole's sermons weren't about scripture," he said quickly. "They were codes. Instructions. He said the harvest was only holy if the ground remembered. That's why they buried them facing west, so the sun would never rise on their sins." Boyd looked ready to argue, but a sharp crack split the night. The sound of gunfire, faint and distant, from the direction of the farmhouse. Abigail's heart lurched. "That's Keller's team." They ran. The rain blurred the world to streaks of light and mud. Abigail slipped once, caught herself, and kept running until the barn lights vanished behind them. When they reached the yard, smoke drifted from the farmhouse chimney, too thick, too dark. Boyd motioned for her to stay low as they approached the porch. The front door hung half open, the wind banging it softly against the frame. Inside, the power was out. Only the storm's lightning illuminated the rooms in brief, ghostly flashes. "Keller," Boyd called. No reply. They stepped over a toppled chair, moved down the hallway toward the living room. Two of the state agents lay sprawled on the floor, unconscious or worse. Their radios crackled weakly. The Polaroid they'd bagged earlier now rested on the table again, out of its evidence sleeve. Fresh writing had appeared beneath the old message. "Second harvest begun." Abigail's hands shook. "He's taunting us." A voice drifted from the back of the house, hoarse, deliberate. "You shouldn't have come tonight." Ethan stepped into the doorway behind them, eyes fixed on the shadows. "Cole," he whispered. A figure emerged, a man draped in a rain-slick coat, face obscured by a shadow. He carried no weapon, but the authority in his stance was unmistakable. His voice was calm, almost kind. "You woke the soil, Ethan. And now it remembers Boyd raised his gun. Hands where I can see them." The man smiled faintly. "You can't arrest a ghost, Sheriff." Before anyone could react, lightning struck somewhere close. The power surged back, and every bulb in the house blazed to life. For one blinding second, the man's face was visible. Older, gaunt, but unmistakably human. Then the lights died again, plunging them into darkness. When they came back up a heartbeat later, he was gone. Only the door at the back of the house swung gently on its hinges, rain blowing through the gap. Boyd exhaled. "He's real. He's not some story." Abigail looked at the Polaroid on the table again. The ink was still wet. She whispered, "He's here for the last of them." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then we end it tonight." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint smell of something burning. Wet straw, and underneath it, something darker. Abigail gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "What do we do?" Ethan looked toward the rain-beaten fields. "We go back to the trench," he said, "before the ground closes for good." The rain slackened just before midnight, leaving the Mercer property drowned in fog. Floodlights along the field sputtered and hissed, their beams turning the mist into white fire. The house behind them was silent now. Keller's team evacuated, the wounded taken to town. Only Abigail, Boyd, and Ethan remained, bound by a grim purpose and the faint hope that the earth might still give up its truth. They walked the muddy track toward the trench. Water had pooled in the furrows, reflecting the sky's bruised color. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked once and went quiet. Ethan carried a lantern. Its glow was small but steady. "They called this the line of witness," he said. "Every one of them buried facing west. He said the sun would burn away their sins if it ever rose behind them." Boyd frowned. "You keep saying he." "You mean Cole?" "Yes, but there was another. A man who came after. He said he was the caretaker of the harvest." Abigail stepped carefully across the mud. "You think that's who we saw in the house?" Ethan's voice trembled. "That wasn't Cole. He died the winter after they took Mara. That thing. He called himself the Sour." They reached the excavation site. Rainwater glistened on the yellow tape and the plastic tarps covering the exposed soil. The dig lights flickered again, then steadied. Abigail crouched at the edge of the trench, her boots sinking. Beneath the tarp, the outlines of half-unearthed coffins lay in a row. She felt the weight of decades pressed down on her, the sense that the field itself was watching. "We salt it," Ethan said quietly. Boyd looked skeptical. "That's superstition." "Maybe," Ethan said, uncapping the tin canister he'd carried since the barn. "But superstition kept me alive. He began scattering coarse salt across the edges of the trench. Each handful caught the lantern light, flaring briefly before sinking into the mud. Abigail helped, wordless. The act felt primitive but right, like sealing a wound. When they finished, the night went utterly still. The only sound was the lantern's faint hiss. Then a voice drifted through the fog, low, almost tender. "Abigail." She froze. It was unmistakable. Her father's voice, warm and familiar, the sound she'd replayed in dreams since childhood. "Dad!" Ethan gripped her arm. "Don't answer it." But she was already standing, turning toward the darkness beyond the floodlights. A figure moved there, tall, indistinct, just at the edge of sight. "Abigail," the voice called again. "Come home, sweetheart." Boyd raised his weapon. "That's not your father." The figure stepped closer. The fog parted enough for them to see a face, an imitation, perfectly shaped yet wrong in its stillness, like a wax mask that had learned how to move. Ethan whispered, "He wears the dead." The lantern flame guttered as a gust of wind swept through the field. The figure vanished. Then the ground beneath them shuddered, softly at first, then harder, until clods of wet soil slid into the trench. One of the tarps tore free, revealing the lid of a coffin cracked open by the shifting earth. Abigail's flashlight beam caught on something inside. A pale hand, bones gleaming slickly in the mud. Around the wrist was a fragment of cloth, faded blue. She staggered back. "Mara!" Ethan dropped to his knees beside the grave, his breath ragged. "No, she was supposed to be with the others. I buried her." Boyd grabbed his shoulder. "We need to move back. The ground's giving," but Ethan was already digging, bare-handed, clawing through the mud as if he could pull time itself apart. The earth swallowed his arms to the elbows before Boyd hauled him away. Lightning flashed, and for a single second the field came alive. Figures rising from the mist, dozens of them, their faces half-formed from steam and rain. The illusion vanished with the thunderclap, leaving only the empty field. Abigail's heart hammered. "What the hell is happening?" Ethan stared at the trench. "He's opening it again." Boyd looked around sharply. "Who?" "The sour," Ethan said. "He's harvesting the living now." The floodlights flickered once more, dimmed, then cut out entirely. The world went black, except for the thin glow of the lantern in Ethan's hands. From the far side of the field came a new sound, the low grind of an engine turning over. Headlights cut through the fog, sweeping across the flooded earth. Boyd muttered, "That's the van." The light locked on them, bright and cold. A figure stepped out from behind the glare and started walking toward them. Abigail whispered, "It's him." The man carried something in one hand, a long, narrow spade. He stopped at the edge of the trench and smiled, rain streaking down his face. "Good evening," he said softly. "You've done my work for me." The man's face came fully into the lantern light now. Clean-shaven, mid-40s, maybe older, eyes sharp and unblinking. His raincoat hung open, revealing a collar stained with mud. There was a faint cross burned into the fabric near his chest pocket, not sewn, but scorched, as if he'd branded it himself. Ethan's voice broke into a whisper. "That's him." The sour Boyd kept his gun level. "Hands where I can see them." The man only smiled. "There's no need for fear, Sheriff. The field chooses who stays and who goes. You've just arrived at the wrong season." Abigail stepped forward before Boyd could stop her. "Why are you doing this? Why my family?" "Because your uncle broke the covenant." His tone was matter-of-fact, almost regretful. "He promised to finish the harvest, and instead he buried it." "The soil remembers betrayal, Miss Mercer." "It always does." Ethan's face twisted. "You murdered children." "I returned them to the ground that birthed them," the sour said softly. "They were never meant to grow into this world." Boyd's voice hardened. "You're under arrest." A flicker of amusement crossed the man's face. "You think iron and paper can hold the will of the earth?" He tossed something into the trench, a small pouch. The instant it landed, the soil hissed and began to bubble. The air filled with the stench of rot. Abigail covered her nose. "What did you—" Before she could finish, the ground split. Mud surged upward, swallowing the open coffin whole. Water poured into the gap, turning it into a pit. Boyd fired once into the air, the sound deafening. "Drop the spade." The sour didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped backward toward the fog. "You can't stop the season, Sheriff." "It's already sown." Then he was gone, swallowed by mist and distance. Ethan lunged to follow, but Boyd caught him. "Don't." "He's trying to draw you out. We can't let him vanish again," Ethan shouted, struggling against his grip. "He'll finish it." "Caleb." Abigail's voice cut through the rain. "Listen!" From across the field came the echo of sobbing, high, frightened, unmistakably a child's. "Caleb," she breathed. They ran. The lantern swung wildly in Ethan's grasp, throwing shards of light through the fog. The sobbing grew louder, leading them toward the edge of the old irrigation ditch. There, huddled beneath a broken sheet of tin, was a boy, filthy, shivering, eyes wide. When he saw Abigail, he recoiled at first, then whispered, "Aunt Abby?" Her heart cracked. She dropped to her knees, reaching for him. "It's me, sweetheart." "You're safe now." He hesitated, then launched himself into her arms. His skin was cold, his body shaking with exhaustion. Boyd scanned the darkness. "We need to move." Now Ethan crouched beside them, tears streaking his rain-soaked face. "Thank God." "Caleb, it's over." But the boy's next words froze them all. "He said it wasn't finished." Abigail pulled back. "Who?" Caleb pointed toward the field. "The man with the fire on his coat. He said he had one more seed to plant thunder rolled again." Boyd grabbed his radio, but it was still dead. "We're heading back to the barn. It's shelter, at least." They half-carried Caleb through the mud. The boy clutched Abigail's sleeve, whispering under his breath as if reciting a prayer. When they reached the barn, the generator still sat lifeless, but the small lantern cast a circle of light big enough for them all. Abigail wrapped Caleb in her coat. "You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." He didn't answer, just stared past her shoulder toward the far wall. "He's watching." She turned. Only the old tools and stacked hay bales stared back. Ethan knelt in front of his nephew. "Listen to me, son. That man can't touch you anymore. We're here." Caleb's voice was barely a breath. "He said he comes when the light dies." The lantern flickered. Once, twice. Then it went out. In the pitch darkness, Abigail heard it. The slow crunch of boots on gravel just outside the barn door. Boyd's gun clicked as he chambered around. "Get behind me." The hinges groaned. The door inched open, letting in a sliver of stormlight. A shadow crossed the threshold, pausing as if to listen. Abigail held Caleb tight, every muscle screaming to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Then, from the darkness beyond the doorway, a voice drifted in. Calm, deliberate. "You can't bury what's already been planted." Boyd fired. The muzzle flash lit the barn in one brutal strobe of white. When their vision cleared, the doorway was empty. Only the echo of footsteps retreated into the rain. Ethan exhaled shakily. "He's gone." Abigail's whisper came through the dark. "No, he's waiting." The storm eased toward dawn, and the fog began to thin. Inside the barn, Abigail sat beside Caleb as he slept curled in her coat. Boyd watched the horizon, rifle across his knees. Ethan stared at the muddy prints that led away from the door, each one filling slowly with water. He spoke without looking up. "Tomorrow we dig every grave until we find her. Mara. Then we salt the rest. That's how we finish it." Boyd nodded, his jaw set. "We finish it." Outside, the first light of morning broke through the clouds, pale and uncertain. The trench in the distance glistened like a wound that refused to close, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone figure stood watching, still as a scarecrow, spade in hand, waiting for the next season to begin. The dawn came colorless. The clouds stretched thin like gauze over a wound. The storm had scoured the land clean, but the field still smelled of iron and wet clay. The trench was half filled with rainwater, a mirror for the pale sky. Abigail stood at its edge, coffee cooling in her hands. Boyd had gone to town for fuel and radio parts. Ethan was somewhere in the barn, sorting the tools he swore they would need. Caleb slept inside the farmhouse under a blanket that had once been Mara's. Every time the wind shifted, Abigail heard him murmur her name. She looked down into the shallow pools where the coffins had been uncovered. Each surface reflected her face. Then, for an instant, another face behind hers, gone when she blinked. She whispered, "You're not taking him again." Footsteps squelched through the mud. Ethan approached carrying 2 shovels and a burlap sack of salt. "We start here," he said, "where the earth still breathes." "Breathe?" she echoed. "The soil moves different when it remembers." Abigail nodded. She no longer argued with his language. After last night, faith and madness had started to share a border. They worked in silence, prying at the softened ground until the shovels hit wood. Ethan brushed away the muck and set the first line of salt along the seam. The smell that rose was not decay, but something sweet. An odor of wildflowers crushed underfoot. He looked at her sharply. "That's wrong. The dead don't smell like that. Then what is it?" "Lure," he said. "He wants us closer." A noise drifted from the farmhouse, Caleb calling her name. Abigail dropped the shovel and ran. Inside, the boy was standing at the window, eyes wide. "He's in the field," he whispered. Abigail crossed the room, heart pounding. Through the wavering glass, she saw him, the sour, half a mile away, motionless at the fence line. In daylight, he looked smaller, almost ordinary, a man built from sinew and stubborn will. But even from here, she could see that the spade in his hand was slick with something darker than rain. Ethan burst in behind her, shotgun leveled. "Back away from the window!" Caleb clutched Abigail's sleeve. "He said there's a name missing." "What name?" "The one the ground won't take." Thunder muttered somewhere far off, though the sky showed no storm. Abigail's stomach knotted. "He means Mara," she said. Ethan nodded once, grim. "He's waiting for her grave to be opened." "We end this before sundown." They gathered what they had: salt, kerosene, the old family Bible whose pages had begun to curl from damp. Boyd returned just as they were loading the supplies into the truck. "Field looks quiet," he said, "but the radio's still dead for 20 miles. Whatever's in that soil, it's killing the signal." Ethan handed him a shovel. "Then we don't call for help." Boyd studied the man's face, saw something resolute there that bordered on peace, and gave a single nod. "All right, let's close this thing." By noon, they were back at the trench. The sun hung weakly above them, the air thick and still. They moved methodically, dig, lift, salt, burn, until the smoke from each sealed grave rose in thin gray threads. Abigail worked without feeling until her hands blistered. Each name they unearthed, Ethan whispered over like a prayer. When they reached the last grave, the soil shifted under her shovel with a hollow sound. Inside was not bone, but an object wrapped in oilcloth. She lifted it carefully. The cloth peeled back to reveal a wooden mask, smooth, expressionless, the circle and line symbol carved deep across the forehead. Ethan stepped away as if struck. "That's his face," he said, "the one he wears when he preaches." Abigail turned it in her hands. "Then this is what he hides behind." The mask was heavier than it looked, slick with the same resinous oil that stained the spade. She felt heat radiating from it, faint but real, like breath. Boyd produced a metal evidence tin. "Let's burn it with the rest." Ethan stopped him. No, fire feeds it, salt seals it. He poured the last of the salt over the mask. For a moment, the wood hissed, and the symbol seemed to fade. Then, just as quickly, new lines seared themselves into the surface. Fresh, black, smoking. Abigail staggered back. It's still alive! From somewhere beyond the field came the low grind of an engine starting. Boyd turned toward the sound, hand on his gun. That's the van again. Ethan's face went pale. He's coming to claim what's left. The van came slowly down the rise, its tires throwing up ribbons of mud. The sun had dimmed behind a new skin of cloud, and the light turned copper, like the world had been filmed through old glass. Boyd crouched beside the trench, pistol drawn. "Abby, get him to the barn," he said, nodding toward Caleb. But Caleb wasn't looking at the van. He was staring at the salted mask that lay on the ground, his expression unreadable. "He says it's his," the boy whispered. Ethan knelt beside him. "Don't listen to that voice, son. That's how he gets in." The van stopped at the fence. The driver's door opened, and the sour stepped out. His coat clung to him, soaked and heavy. The cross on his chest black against the gray. He carried the spade like a shepherd's staff. "I told you," he said quietly, "you can't seal the earth with salt. The ground only hungers more." Boyd fired a warning shot into the air. The echo cracked across the field, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, small, patient, as though this had all been expected. Abigail picked up the lantern and moved to stand beside her uncle. "You killed my brother. You buried my niece. You don't get to stand here and talk about hunger." The sour's eyes met hers, bright and colorless. "Your brother offered them. I merely gave the ground what it was promised." "Liar," Ethan said. "I buried you with them." "You buried my name," the man corrected, stepping closer. "Not me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When he opened it, the mask lay inside, untouched by salt or burn marks. Abigail looked down in horror. The mask at her feet was gone. "How? You think you can fight the season with shovels and superstition," the sour said softly. "But this field doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the harvest." Ethan lifted his shotgun. "Then reap this." The blast shattered the silence, throwing dirt and smoke into the air. When it cleared, the sour was gone. Only the van remained, its engine idling. Boyd edged forward cautiously, weapon raised. He wrenched open the driver's door, empty. The seat was still wet. On the dash lay a stack of Polaroids, each showing a different part of the Mercer property. The house, the barn, the trench. The last photo was of them standing exactly where they stood now, Ethan's shotgun raised, Boyd beside him, Abigail frozen mid-motion. The timestamp in the corner read October 10th, 5:37 p.m. Abigail looked at her watch. 5:37 p.m. A shiver crawled up her spine. He's been one step ahead the whole time. Ethan swallowed hard. No, he's been standing right behind us before Boyd could turn. Something struck him across the back. A blur of movement. The sound of metal connecting with bone. He dropped to his knees, dazed but conscious. The spade clattered beside him. The sour was there again, face expressionless, coat hanging open. He raised the shovel once more, but Abigail lunged forward, grabbing the lantern and hurling it. It hit him square in the chest. Glass burst, flame fanned out. The fire caught his coat first, then the spilled kerosene. He staggered back, engulfed, but his voice came clear through the roar. "You can't kill the seed." Ethan kicked the mask into the burning mud. The symbol glowed white, then blackened, curling in on itself until the wood cracked. A shriek, neither human nor wind, tore through the air. When the flames finally sank to embers, only the spade remained, half melted, the metal twisted like a thing alive. Boyd, bleeding from the shoulder, sat heavily in the mud. "Tell me that's the end." Ethan stared at the glowing metal. "It's the end of him." Not of what he started. Abigail looked at Caleb, who stood watching the fire's last light fade from his eyes. "He said there was a name the ground wouldn't take," she murmured. "Maybe that's you." The boy didn't answer. He reached down, scooped a handful of ash, and let it fall through his fingers. The flakes caught the breeze and scattered across the salted field. For the first time since the night began, the wind changed direction, carrying the smoke away instead of toward them. Ethan lowered his head. Let it rest. They stayed until the fire died completely. The van's engine sputtered, coughed once, and went still. No trace of the man, no movement in the rows of corn, only the faint crackle of cooling metal. Boyd tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it around his wound. "We'll bring the state boys back tomorrow," he said. "Mark every grave. Finish the job." Abigail looked to the horizon, where a thin seam of light broke through the clouds. "Tomorrow," she agreed. But even as she said it, she could feel the field shifting underfoot. Subtle, almost tender, like breath through sleeping lungs. Morning came pale and soundless, the kind of light that erases color rather than giving it. The Mercer property lay under a haze of smoke that refused to rise. Charred soil steamed around the trench, puddles of black water collected in the shovel marks. Sheriff Boyd stood at the fence line speaking into a new radio that crackled in and out. "Site secured. Repeat, secured. No sign of the suspect. Requesting a full forensic crew and medevac." He let go of the transmit button, listening to static, then sighed. Signals still dying out past the ridge. Abigail crouched near the burnt patch where the sour had fallen. Only a spoon-shaped scar remained in the mud. The metal of his spade twisted like melted bone. The smell of ash clung to her hair and skin. Ethan approached, carrying a thermos and 3 paper cups. His hands shook slightly as he poured. "It's gone quiet," he said. "Too quiet." "It's what we wanted," Boyd muttered, taking a sip. Ethan stared at the field. "Quiet out here doesn't mean peace, Sheriff. It means the ground's listening." Abigail brushed dirt from her notebook. "You really believe it still remembers?" Ethan nodded. "So do you, or you wouldn't be writing it down." She didn't argue. Each time her pen touched paper, she felt the story breathing underneath the words, the way soil moves beneath a plow. By mid-morning, the state vans arrived. White boxes with blue seals, men and women in gray windbreakers unloading cameras and body bags. Agent Keller stepped out first, her left arm in a sling. The bandages on her face were fresh. She must have come straight from the hospital. "You should have waited for us," she said. Boyd gestured at the blackened trench. "If we had, you'd be collecting more bodies." Keller's eyes softened when she saw Caleb standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, wrapped in a blanket. "That the boy?" Abigail nodded. "He's all that's left." Keller exhaled. "Then we do this by the book. You and your family stay clear while we process." Ethan stiffened. "You think rules are going to keep this from happening again?" "Rules are what keep the living alive," Keller said. "Whatever you think this is, we treat it as evidence." She turned to her team. "Grid search, 1 meter spacing. Nothing leaves this field without cataloging." The agents moved like cautious surgeons, flagging bones, sifting soil through mesh. Each new discovery was bagged, labeled, photographed. The sound of shutters clicking filled the air like insects. Abigail watched until her stomach turned. She walked toward the ridge where the view widened over miles of flat country. From here, the farmhouse looked small, a pale scar in the land. Wind tugged her hair across her face. Somewhere in that endless horizon, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, a glint of glass or metal catching the sun, but when she blinked, it was gone. Boyd joined her. "They'll be here a week, maybe more." "Then what?" she asked. He shrugged. "Paperwork. Court filings, a few news cycles, then another case. That's not enough. He looked at her carefully. You're thinking about staying, aren't you? I need to know what this place is, she said. What it was before my family ever came here. He handed her a folded map he'd pulled from his pocket. County Records Office in Dreer Hollow. Old survey lines, church plots, mineral rights. Start there, she unfolded the map. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded to rust. But one marking stood out. A narrow strip labeled Harvest Tract, 1874, owned by C.R. Cole. Her breath caught. The Reverend's family. Boyd nodded. Looks like he's been planting things here for a long time. At noon, the wind shifted again. The smell of the burned field changed. Less smoke, more earth. Agent Keller called from the trench. Sheriff, you'd better see this. They climbed down carefully. Keller pointed to the mud where a section of coffin had split open during the night. Inside, carved into the underside of the lid, was a column of letters. Names scratched roughly with a nail. Ethan traced them with one trembling finger. These aren't the dead, he said. These are the ones yet to be. Near the bottom of the list, the last name was unfinished. Just a single letter. C. Caleb. Abigail felt the ground sway beneath her. He left the list waiting for the next season. Keller signaled her team. Bag the lid. Nobody touches that inscription barehanded, but even as they lifted it, the wet wood seemed to breathe, releasing a thin hiss of air, like a sigh escaping the lungs of the field itself. The sound carried across the rows and faded into silence. Ethan whispered, the ground still talking. The sound of that sigh lingered longer than any wind. For a few seconds, no one moved. Even the investigators seemed to forget what they were doing. Then the air settled again, heavy and wet with the smell of disturbed soil. Keller was the first to break the stillness. Back it up. Sail the section. Her voice carried calm authority, but her eyes darted from the trench to the horizon, as if she half expected the field itself to answer. Ethan climbed out slowly. Mud streaked across his palms. You can close your boxes, Agent, but you won't close that voice. Mr. Mercer, she said, you've seen enough for one lifetime. He wiped his hands on his jeans. Not yet. Inside the farmhouse, the floorboards had begun to dry, leaving white salt stains where the rain had run under the doors. Caleb sat on the sofa with a cup of tea that Abigail had coaxed him into holding. He hadn't spoken since they found the list. He just stared at his reflection in the dark window. Abigail knelt beside him. You're safe here, she said quietly. Nobody's going to take you back to that field. Caleb's gaze didn't shift. He's still there. She felt her stomach tighten. We burned him. Caleb shook his head slowly. Not him. The other one. The one under Abigail swallowed hard. What do you mean, under? The voice that tells him what to do, the boy whispered. It's in the dirt. It keeps whispering the names. His hand trembled, and a line of tea slopped onto the floor. The stains spread like a map of tiny rivers before sinking into the boards. By late afternoon, Keller's team packed their samples for transport. The trench had been covered again, the black plastic fluttering like a shroud. Boyd signed the final release forms, his left arm in a sling, and turned to Abigail. We'll post deputies until the feds finish. After that, this land goes back to you. She looked across the empty rows. I don't want it. Then sell it, he said, but his tone carried no conviction. Nobody'll buy it, but at least you'll have tried. Abigail glanced toward the barn. Ethan was inside with a small radio he'd scavenged from Keller's van, fiddling with the dial. Static filled the air, broken now and then by faint voices. News, country music, a weather report. Then, suddenly, a clear male voice. And the harvest will be plentiful. Gather what is thine, for the ground remembers. Ethan's head jerked up. Abby! She and Boyd ran in. The radio hissed, then repeated the line again, slower this time. The voice was calm, deliberate, too calm. The ground remembers. The frequency marker glowed steady at 7 a.m., local talk band. Keller had said the transmitter range was less than 20 miles. Boyd stared at the radio as if it were a snake. That's live. Somebody's broadcasting. Abigail felt the back of her neck prickle. He's using the old church transmitter. Ethan nodded grimly. The one in Dreer Hollow? They drove before sunset. The road to the hollow wound through fields of cut corn and scrub, dust kicking up behind the truck in a red haze. Caleb sat between them, clutching the old Bible. The closer they got, the stronger the static grew, until the same phrase filled the cab over and over, rising and falling like breath. The ground remembers. The ground remembers. Dreer Hollow appeared as a smudge of roofs and trees at the base of the hills. The church stood apart from the town, a small, leaning structure of weathered wood. Its steeple long collapsed. Through the windshield they could see the faint glow of a single light inside. Boyd parked half a mile out. We go on foot from here, he said, checking his weapon. Ethan handed Abigail the lantern. If the whisper's coming from under that church, we end it there. Caleb reached for her hand. His fingers were cold but steady. He's waiting for us, he said. Who? The one under. Abigail squeezed his hand. Then we go wake him up. They stepped into the dusk. The last of the sun broke through the clouds, painting the ruined steeple blood red before disappearing altogether. The church door swung slightly in the wind, creaking open just enough to let the whisper spill out. Soft, rhythmic, patient. Words too low to understand, but full of meaning. The earth beneath their feet vibrated like a living thing. The front door moaned inward under Ethan's push, hinges crying out after decades of neglect. Dust lifted from the floorboards and hung in the beam of Abigail's lantern like ash in still air. Inside, the old church smelled of rot and iron. Rows of pews sat at crooked angles, their ends carved with the same twisted vine pattern seen on the Mercer family Bible. A hymn book lay open on the pulpit, its pages glued together with mildew, the words almost eaten away. Caleb stayed close to Abigail, his eyes adjusting quickly to the dim. It sounds like breathing, he whispered. Ethan nodded. The whispering they'd heard through the radio was louder here, no longer a phrase but a continuous murmuring under the floor. It rose and fell like wind through hollow wood, but deeper, organic. Boyd stepped forward, sweeping his flashlight along the aisle. You two check the altar. I'll look for the transmitter. Abigail moved toward the pulpit. The floorboards creaked, flexing beneath her boots. This place was condemned years ago, she said. They were supposed to tear it down. Some buildings refused to die, Ethan murmured. Behind the pulpit, the boards had been pried up and nailed back again, badly. Fresh nails gleamed in the lantern light. Abigail knelt and touched one. It was still tacky with resin. Somebody's been here recently, she said. Ethan crouched beside her and listened. The whisper came strongest from the seam between the boards. He buried something under here. Or someone, Abigail said quietly. Boyd found the transmitter on a table near the back wall, an old CB unit wired to a marine battery, its dials still glowing faintly. The mic was pinned down by a Bible open to the Book of Amos. A verse had been circled in red pencil, though they dig into hell, thence shall my hand take them. Boyd lifted the mic. The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Abigail froze, hand poised above the loose boards. Did you turn it off? No, Boyd said. It just stopped. Then the floor beneath her shifted, a hollow thud, followed by a slow, rising creak. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the board splintered outward. A column of air rushed up from the opening, heavy with the stench of wet soil. The whisper began again, louder now, echoing up from the dark below. Only this time the words were clear. "Caleb!" The boy jerked as if struck. His face went pale. "He wants me to come down." "No," Abigail said sharply, stepping in front of him. "You're not going anywhere near that." Ethan peered into the gap. A narrow staircase descended into blackness, wood steps soaked and sagging, leading to what looked like a cellar. At the bottom flickered a faint, sickly orange light. "Someone's down there," he whispered. Boyd steadied his weapon. "Stay behind me." The descent was slow, each step groaning under their weight. The smell grew worse. Rot, metal, something like burned sugar. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling beams, tapping on the barrel of Boyd's pistol. At the bottom they found a low, earthen chamber. Roots hung from the ceiling like ropes, glistening with moisture. In the center of the floor sat a wooden chair, and in it, the body of a man. He was long dead, skin mummified to parchment, clothes fused with the flesh. A wire headset clung to his skull. The CB mic lay in his lap. A crude symbol had been burned into his chest, the same cross-twined with vine that adorned the Mercer Bible. Ethan swallowed. "That's him." Reverend Cole Abigail stepped closer, holding the lantern higher. The Reverend's mouth was open as if caught mid-sermon. Salt crusted around his lips and down his throat, shimmering faintly in the light. Boyd leaned in, studying the wires that ran from the headset into the wall. "This was his transmitter?" "He's been the voice all along." "No," Ethan said softly. "Listen." The whisper hadn't stopped. It still filled the chamber, but it wasn't coming from the speaker. It was coming from the ground beneath the chair. Abigail set down the lantern and crouched, brushing aside a layer of salt and dirt. The soil was loose, freshly disturbed. Her fingers touched something smooth, curved, cold. She pulled gently, revealing the top of a glass jar. Inside the jar, floating in a pale solution, was a small object that looked like a root. But when she brought it closer, she saw it was a finger, perfectly preserved. There were more jars buried around it, half visible through the dirt. Dozens of them. Each held a different fragment, an eye, a tooth, a strip of skin, all suspended as if waiting for harvest. Ethan's voice shook. He was planting them. The whisper swelled suddenly, a single phrase bursting from every direction. "The seed remembers its shape." The light flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed the cellar. And from somewhere below, deep in the ground, came the sound of something moving. Slow, deliberate, pushing upward through the wet earth. 2 days later, the air above Dreer Hollow still smelled scorched. The containment crews worked quietly, floodlights bleaching the flattened church site into a glare that erased shadow. Bulldozers rumbled back and forth, their tracks sinking deep into the damp earth. Every few minutes, one of the men would stop, lift a hand, and wait while the ground stopped shuddering under them. Abigail watched from the fence line beside Keller's command truck. The FBI agent's arm was in a fresh cast now, but she hadn't left the field once since the dig began. "We've already pulled 3 more human skeletons from under the nave," she said, not looking away from the pit. "Female. Adolescent." None of them matched the age of the Reverend's documented victims. "So, older graves," Abigail said. Keller shook her head. "Younger." Within the last 5 years, Abigail felt the wind slide down the back of her neck. "You're telling me someone kept the rituals going?" "Or the ground did," Keller replied. "I'm not ruling anything out anymore." Boyd walked up carrying a coffee thermos. His boots were caked with black clay. "You two might want to step back. They hit something solid." The bulldozer's engine idled down. A worker in a reflective vest signaled for shovels. Within minutes, they'd uncovered a flat surface, a wooden hatch, perfectly preserved, the planks cross-braced with iron. The timber wasn't charred. It looked as though the fire had curved around it. Keller crouched. "Seals intact." No burn marks. Boyd wiped the mud from a hinge with his sleeve. This wasn't under the church. It was below the foundation. The wind shifted again. From somewhere beneath the boards came a faint sound, rhythmic and dull. Thud, thud, thud. Keller stood. "That's pressure from the soil collapsing," she said automatically, but her voice trembled. "No," Abigail whispered. "That's knocking." The sound stopped. Then 3 new knocks, slower, deliberate. Ethan's voice came over the radio from the farmhouse. "Abby? You hearing that too?" "Yes. I've got the boy with me." He started whispering the same pattern about a minute ago. 3 knocks. Over and over, Abigail's grip tightened on the fence rail. "Keep him inside, Ethan. Don't let him—" A sharp crack cut her off as one of the hinges snapped. The hatch lifted slightly, just enough to exhale a gust of air that smelled like roots after rain. The nearest worker stumbled back, coughing. Keller drew her sidearm. "Step away from the pit!" The air hummed. A faint vibration rippled through the ground, spreading outward like water disturbed by a stone. Floodlights flickered. Every metal surface on the trucks began to rattle. Boyd shouted, "Kill the engines!" Now! The machines fell silent. For a moment, everything held still. The workers frozen, Keller's pistol steady, Abigail's breath caught halfway. Then the hatch lifted again, pushed from beneath by something that gleamed wetly in the artificial light. A tendril of black roots slid through the gap, thicker than a wrist, pulsing as if it had veins. It coiled once, sensing the air, then struck upward with a sound like tearing cloth. One of the floodlights toppled, shattering against the dirt. Darkness rippled outward from the impact. Abigail ran. She didn't remember deciding to. Her legs simply moved. Behind her, she heard Keller shouting commands, gunfire cracking in short bursts, men screaming as the earth opened wider. By the time she reached the ridge, the pit was gone, swallowed in a cloud of dust and smoke. The bulldozers looked half-melted, their metal frames sinking into the soil as if into tar. The sound that followed wasn't a whisper anymore. It was breathing, slow, huge, patient. Boyd staggered toward her, face gray with dust. "Everyone clear?" she shouted. He shook his head. 2 of the crew didn't make it out. He looked back at the heaving ground. "Tell me what that is." Abigail stared at the undulating surface where the church had stood. "The harvest starting again," she said. Back at the farmhouse, Ethan met them at the door. Caleb sat on the floor clutching his knees, eyes wide and unfocused. He was whispering rhythmically. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. "It started right before the radios went dead," Ethan said. "He said it's calling for him." Abigail knelt in front of the boy. "Look at me, Caleb. You don't have to answer it." He blinked slowly. "It's hungry. It's lonely."